So Nathan Ingram is actually the host at iThemes Training. So he actually teaches WordPress and freelance business development topics via live webinar. He's also the creator of Advanced Coaching. So he works with WordPress business owners individually and in groups to help them become more successful in their business. Nathan's been a web business owner since 1995, and he's based in Birmingham, Alabama. He's also a WordCamp organizer for WordCamp Birmingham. Nate, are you on the line?
I am. My video is off currently.
I'm sorry, I missed that last part.
My video is turned off by, I think, on your end. There we go.
Sorry about that, Nathan.
All right.
Now we can see you.
Hey, how's everybody?
Hi, great. Thanks for joining us.
Wonderful. Great. Yeah, happy to.
It's better now that we can see your face.
Yeah, so I'm sharing my screen, but it's not showing up that I can see. Is it showing up for you guys?
I can see it.
Okay, great. All right. So we're ready to start?
Yeah, we're ready.
Fantastic. So what we're going to talk about today is how to stop working with everybody and really recognizing what I call the friendly monsters, which are problem clients that can tend to invade your business. And this is such an important subject to deal with because, I'm a passionate advocate for freelancers and business owners because I believe in freedom that comes from owning your own business, being in control of your own time, your life, your priorities. And many freelancers and agency owners are just one more bad client away from throwing in the towel. And it's a shame because virtually all these problems that we have with clients can be mitigated or completely eliminated by great systems and processes. And Carrie talked a lot about that in the last hour, the last section. It was a really good talk. This subject that I'm talking about today comes from a book that I published back in January called Dealing with Problem Clients. We're going to hit the high points of that today and talking about 4 fences that you need to build to keep problem clients in check. Just briefly talk about that and really spend our time on 4 friendly monsters that you need to know. These are the kinds of clients you need to stop working with or put great processes in your business that I call fences to keep those problem clients in check. So the idea here is that clients are friendly monsters. Now, most of us, if you've spent some time working with clients, you realize that, most clients at the beginning, at least, are pretty easy to work with. But no matter what kind of client you're working with, whether they seem to be good or they seem to be trouble, we need to build 4 fences around those clients. And those fences are clarity, commitments, communication, and documentation. Now, there's other fences you could certainly make a case for, but at the bare minimum, those are 4 principles, 4 fences that have to be in place in our business to keep problem clients in check. Because here's the thing you learn as you start to work with clients. As cute and fuzzy as that monster is, every monster has the potential for transformation. And even friendly monsters have teeth. So we have to learn to fence in these monsters or we're going to end up wasting our time, our money, and our emotional capital dealing with clients that can truly make our lives miserable. So we're going to talk just for a minute about building a system for our business that comprised by these 4 fences. And again, I'm just going to hit the high points. It's mostly covered in the book and in one of my courses that deals with this as well. So the first of these fences is clarity. And the most important thing about clarity is being specific. Having a great intake form, either on your website or a consistent checklist of questions that you're asking every client, every project, every time. And that's important because you've got to get clarity on what the client expects. A lot of times you have a client that transforms from a nice, friendly person into a very difficult monster because we never got clarity at the beginning of what this client actually expected. So creating a consistent checklist of questions that you ask every client, every project, every time, and not relying on your own memory to remember to ask those questions over that first coffee meeting. Having that consistent checklist is critical. And then having a scope of work that clearly outlines what it is you're going to provide for the client in the project, for what dollar figure. Having great clarity around what the client can expect you to do. And then also a clear contract that is clear on the expectations and consequences of what happens in your process. If you do this, we do this. If you don't do this, then we don't do that. And here's all the ways that works together. That clear contract is absolutely critical. So those things start to form clarity around the client relationship. The second fence that's so important is the fence of commitments. commitments. And it's important that each of us, if we're working with clients, if you have a business of any size, that you have a process to build websites or do whatever it is that you do that includes opportunities for the client to make commitments at key points along the way. Now, in my process, there's actually 9 different phases of client commitment. And each of those phases builds on the next. It's because really it's a human being issue. Healthy relationships, all healthy relationships, whether it's marriage, family, friendships, whatever, all healthy relationships are based on healthy commitments. So design your business process the way you work every client, every project with those commitments in mind. Before I even meet with a person, I establish with them a minimum price. In order to work with us, it costs this much. Before you write a proposal, I give them a ballpark quote with a range. And I'm not going to spend the time writing a proposal unless they've committed to that range of pricing. Early on in the project, we're going to get them to commit some content to us so we know actually what we're trying to build. We get them to sign off on the site design. We get them to sign off on the site before launch to bring a clear end to the development phase. Anytime we have to go backwards in that process, it's going to cost more money because they've made commitments along the way. And it just helps to keep that relationship moving well. It's a good way to keep problem clients in check. Now, another option here is communication. The third fence is communication. What I've learned over the years is that few things can improve the client's experience with you as a vendor more than clear, regular communication. And truly, if you want to set yourself apart from other developers, become great at communicating with your clients, keeping your clients in the loop regularly on a project. And a lot of us, if we've got bad news, we've hit a snag or things aren't going the way we want, we tend to hide in a cave because most people who are web professionals tend to be more introverted than extroverted. And the last thing we want to do is have some, difficult conversation with the client if things aren't going well. But it's much better to communicate regularly, even if it's not good news, to keep the client in the loop. I mean, don't overshare, but communicate. It's great to keep the client on the same page. It's much better than springing a bunch of bad news on them at the end when now you've got to delay the project launch for 3 weeks, for example. So communication, absolutely critical. Become great at communicating with your clients. Now, last of all, the fourth fence is documentation. We've got to document, because if you don't document, you're relying on your own memory, or worse, the client's memory for the decisions that you made. Now, a lot of times I'll meet with a client by video chat or over the phone or face-to-face. And it took me a while to get used to communicating in writing, even after a face-to-face meeting like that. It's so important because when you make a decision in one of those verbal face-to-face in a call type of meeting, the client may not remember that decision. And I've had to learn that the hard way over the years. So get used to communicating in writing, because written communication is referenceable. And we're going to look at a couple of problem clients where that's going to be very, very important. So what that looks like is after you have a conversation with the client, you email them to confirm, hey, thanks for the meeting today. It was great. These are the things we talked about. Here's what's on my to-do list. Here's what's on your to-do list. These are the things we decided. And that way the client doesn't even have to respond. You can simply refer back to that email if there's ever a discrepancy. So implement a system that's going to capture all that project communication, and don't go overboard on this. If you self-identify like I do as a geek, we can geek out trying to find the best possible solution, and we'll do 6 months of research and try to find a product that we never actually end up using at all. Just pick one and use it. The best system to capture project communication is one that you'll use consistently. Document, document, document. Keep those records. That's critical to protecting you from these friendly monsters. So that was like a machine gun look at these 4 fences. Every single one of them is important. Clarity, commitments, communication, documentation, to keep those problem clients in check. These fences are absolutely critical, because one of these days, that wonderful, nice client that you have in your system right now is going to morph into a monster, and these fences will help to keep them in check. So let's spend the last of our time together talking about 4 monsters that you should know and how to use those fences to keep them contained. Now, before we get into this, let me just say there's great clients out there. I've got wonderful clients today, especially if any of them are watching this video right now. There's also terrible clients who are out there who don't care about you, who don't treat you fairly, who walk all over you if you let them. And that's why we have to build these fences. Because if you don't build the fences around those monsters, you let them run all over your life. And by the way, if you only have 3 out of the 4 fences, guess what? Monsters are going to escape out of the wall you don't have built yet. So we've got to have those things in place. Let me give you an example of one of the monsters that you might encounter. And perhaps you found this person. This is the one I call the invisible man. Now, these are not gender specific, right? So and there are plenty of women who can be an invisible man. This is just what I've decided to call it. The invisible man is hot and then cold and hot again. They express interest and then disappear unexpectedly. They repeatedly reschedule planned meetings that take a long time to respond. You email this person and they're immediately back, they're wanting information and then they're gone. Poof, crickets for 2 weeks. You don't hear anything from them, or 3 weeks or a month. If you've ever seen the invisible man, they can be really complicated to deal with. Usually, what I've learned about this kind of client is usually they are well-intentioned, but they're just busy. The invisible man can be a busy professional. She can be a business owner. And when they first start talking to you, the website is their top priority. But then the next day, one of their other 23 top priorities is the top priority. They're busy. It's understandable what's going on with them, because I live in that world a lot of times too. But the problem with the invisible man is that he or she tends to disappear during the project and then reappear with unreasonable demands when timing gets critical. That's when the invisible man turns into what I call the stealth bomber. They appear out of nowhere and they drop bombs all over your world. And so you got to figure out how to deal with this person, because they are everywhere. And by the way, if you notice the tendency of a person to start exhibiting the characteristics of an invisible man when you're first starting to deal with them, they don't get any better during the project. Don't think that, if they're hard to reach when you're trying to get a proposal made, they're going to be any different when you're working with them on the project. These kinds of clients rarely change. So what do? Here's the containment strategy for the invisible man. You focus on clarity. So you want to have clear wording in your contract that describes projects that are delayed by the client. You have something in your contract that talks about what happens when a project has to be suspended or abandoned because the client has just gone AWOL. So it's got to be in your contract with great clarity, and then make sure the client understands that process in verbal reminders and written reminders, and then hold the client to the consequences their behavior warrants. If the client suspends the project, then invoke your suspended project clause. Otherwise, you train them to misbehave further and you create a monster. So one of the things I'll share on this is that when you have a client that's delaying the project and poof, they've become an invisible man and they've disappeared, clarity is absolutely critical, because the longer a project takes, the more likely it is to experience scope creep and go off the rails. If a client comes back to you 6 months from now, they may have new ideas and new things, and they expect you to do all of that under the same scope of work. So the longer a project takes, the more easily communication gets derailed. Just keep that in mind and use those walls to fence in the invisible man. Now, the second that I want to introduce you to is the one I call the question mark. Now, the question mark has no idea what he wants or she wants, or they want everything. The question mark asks endless questions. They have no idea of what kind of budget they want. They just love to ask questions, and they love to dream. They love to think about their concept. Now, when you meet a question mark, the containment strategy and the fence to absolutely reinforce is the fence of commitment, because these clients are classic time wasters. If you're trying to be a nice person dealing with a question mark, what you'll find is you will invest hours and hours and hours with them before they ever make any kind of commitment back to you or even think about it. They just love to ask questions, in my experience. So what do? When you're dealing with a question mark, someone who just loves to ask, you want to make sure you have that very clear intake form. And maybe it's one on your website. I actually have 2 intake forms that I use. One is fairly short and one is really, really long. And if I see a person who has question mark tendencies, I refer them to that really long intake form, because I want to see, what, are they going to actually commit to me to do the work to complete that form, or are they just really wanting to ask a bunch of questions? So use an intake form. And before you even commit to them for that first hour initial consultation, make them go through that form. And then when you finally meet with them, if you decide to take that step, you got to remember that the purpose of that first client consultation is not for them to ask a million questions. The purpose of that meeting, you're investing an hour in them to gather enough information to create a proposal. They're not there to daydream. They're there to help you understand what it is they're trying to accomplish. And then get the price early. If I find a person who I believe is going to be a question mark, very quickly out of my mouth come the words something like, to work with me, the minimum price is blank. Because what I've learned over the years is the best way to contain a question mark is with a $sign. Because as soon as you put a dollar figure on the table, the question mark tends to be quiet because things just got real. It's gonna cost some money to work with you. And if they have just a lot of questions and you can't even figure out, you can't even figure out what to make the proposal around because they're not even sure, that's when you need to bring in a discovery phase or some sort of consulting agreement. How many times have I spent hours with a client who wants to have an e-commerce store and they're trying to think through pricing and shipping and tax and fulfillment, and I've done all that for free, and maybe you have too, all for the privilege of writing a proposal they may or may not ever read, and that's foolishness. You can waste a lot of time with a client like this. So if they don't know all the answers and they can't give you enough information where you can actually write a proposal, it's time to go into a discovery phase or a consulting agreement of some kind where it's simply a scope of work and a price. The scope of work is we'll answer these questions and the price is however much it's going to cost. That's a good way to deal with that question mark. You want to focus on commitment and get them committing something back to you as quickly as possible. All right, the third friendly monster you need to meet is the boundary buster. Now, the boundary buster is one of those you might need to fire immediately or not take on at all, although they can be contained with some skill. So here's what a boundary buster looks like. The boundary buster is the one who sends a 3 a.m. email with a 7:30 a.m. follow-up wondering if you've gotten the email and gotten the work done. The boundary buster can tend to insist on after hours or holiday meetings, and they work on the weekends. They expect you to as well. This is a really difficult person to work with. They're pressure. It's always now. You've got to do it now. And they don't care about any of the boundaries that a normal person would care about. So what do you do with the boundary buster? The fence that you really need to focus on is the fence of communication. Clearly communicating how and when you work and sticking to your guns. I work during normal business hours. I don't work on weekends. I don't work on holidays. And if you really need me outside of business hours for a true emergency, it's going to cost you at least double. So you got to clearly communicate that. It's your business. You can set the rules, but you have to let these people know up front, and you can't vacillate about it. You've got to be clear on how you work, communicate that to them, and don't back down. Now, one of the things I've learned about the boundary buster is we can actually create these boundary busters accidentally. And it works something like this. Have you ever been sitting on your couch watching TV or sitting in bed watching Netflix or whatever? Say it's 10 o'clock at night and bing, you get an email from the client on your phone. And if you're like me, I can't go to sleep if there's a red notification bubble. So I've got to look at the email and see what's going on. Oh, it's just a quick email from a client. They have a quick question. Or, oh, it's just going to take 5 minutes to log into their site and change out that image or whatever. So it's 10 o'clock at night. They send me an email and I shoot them a quick response and I pat myself on the back for great customer service, right? But if you think about it, what have I just done? I just told the client that I work at night and they can email me at 10 o'clock and expect an immediate response. What I've just done is I've fed the mogwai after midnight. I have created a monster. So we can create these boundary busters, whether we realize it or not. So how do you deal with them? When you're dealing with a boundary buster, you've got to set the tone in the initial meeting on how and when, and then how and when you're going to follow up with them. We're not going to meet at night or on the weekends unless they are genuinely extraordinary circumstances. I occasionally will do a night or a weekend meeting for a great client who just for whatever reason that week can't meet during the day. But the boundary buster is the one who's going to test all of your fences. So don't violate your own boundaries. Make sure you stick to your guns when you're dealing with this client. This is the kind of client that is an excellent candidate for what I call the PETA surcharge. Now, PETA stands for pain in the asterisk. And if you're going to work with a client like this, you need to charge more. You got to make it worth your time. And sometimes, again, you've got to fire the client. This one, oftentimes you have to fire. When the client turns into a boundary buster, they are often very difficult to deal with after that. Just make sure that you have the scenario of firing the client covered in your contract. Otherwise, you may just have to live with it until the project is finished. Okay, fourth monster mark, and I think we're going to have time for some questions today, which will be fun. The fourth is the drama queen. Now, I've got a coaching client who calls these drama queens her diva clients. And these are, again, there's plenty of men that are drama queens, okay? This is not gender specific. But the drama queen complains about everything. Everything is an emergency. Her favorite word or his favorite word is now. Or maybe they worked with the previous developer who, quote unquote, did everything wrong. Now, when you're working with these drama queens, these diva clients, the quickest way to pick up on them is they're complaining, because they complain about everything. It's very difficult to satisfy this kind of person. And when I'm talking to a client for the first time and they start talking about a previous developer who did everything wrong, it's a full stop. We're going to stop and we're going to ask a bunch of questions about that scenario, because I need to know exactly where it went off the rails. Now, I've been doing web development since 1995. I've been in our world for a long time, and I realize there's a bunch of knuckleheaded web developers out there. And there are some projects that we take on as rescue projects where I have to scratch my head, because you would literally, it takes a lot of effort to screw up a website this badly. I mean, you would have to, there's some things, even with a site right now we're dealing with, that I just scratch my head and wonder what in the world was this previous developer thinking. But on the other hand, this really could be a bad developer. On the other hand, this could be a client who's a drama queen who cannot be satisfied. And we better dig into, understand, what did this person do? What did the developer do? What did you do? How did you explain this? Dig in and ask questions, because if you end up taking on a drama queen as a client, you'll never be able to satisfy that person either. And the chances are they'll be sitting across from some other poor schmuck in 6 months complaining about you. So you really have to dig in and see who you're dealing with here, and either not take on this client, or if you've got one, you can contain a drama queen by documentation. System trumps drama. And this is so important to understand. Work your system, don't break your own rules, and realize that when you document all the commitments they've made along the way, the documents they've signed, the decisions that you've made documented in email, when the drama queen starts giving you all the drama because they want something different than they previously agreed about. By the way, drama queen changes her minds frequently, forgets about previous decisions that he or she made. When you keep good records and you can refer back, remember on last Tuesday at 3 p.m., we had this email, and this is system trumps drama. You can point back to your documentation, point back to your system. They've committed to it. System trumps drama. It takes all the exclamation points out of the emails that they send. It's a wonderful thing. So those are 4 clients. Clients are friendly monsters. It's imperative to keep that friendly monster contained using these 4 fences of clarity, commitments, communication, and documentation. Even if the client seems wonderful now, keep those fences up, because every client has the potential to transform into a real monster. Now, I'll end it up with this question right here, which is, how strong are your fences today? If you look at your business today, how strong are your fences? Are you great on clarity? Are you great on commitments? Great on communication? Great on documentation? Chances are you're pretty good on some of them, but where can you improve? What are some things you can do immediately that are going to strengthen these fences to keep the client contained? And dream with me a little bit. How much better would your business be if all of your problem clients stayed contained, stayed within the fences? How much better would your life be if you didn't have the stresses of problem clients? I'll leave you with this. Good fences make great clients. I think we have a few minutes for questions here. You can download the slides. You can get a link to that problem clients book and so forth at nathaningram.com/monsters. We have any questions from
Nathan,
the chat?
That was awesome. Thank you. As always, I was like sitting over here getting really excited. So thank you so much for that. We were real short on our last break, and we had a couple of announcements we didn't get to.
Sure.
So I don't think we have time for questions, but I put in the chat how people can get in touch with you.
Super.
So you guys can reach out to Nathan, or do you have a few minutes to stick around and kind of engage in the chat room a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Or you can tweet at me at Nathan Ingram as well, and I'll answer on Twitter.
Perfect.
And I'll stay in the chat.